For today's episode, I'm super excited to be welcoming Mathieu Dumoulin, lead data engineer at CostPay, to be joining me having a conversation about building a data function from scratch. In his journey, he shares about his experience transitioning from software engineering to learning some of the data engineering tools in the modern data stack today, and what possibilities that's afforded him to be running a post Series A startup data team all by himself. And so stay tuned and get ready to hear what he has to say. I didn't know you were like doing data science like 10, 15 years ago.
Oh yeah.
So I'd like to just kind of go back a bit to that. And, back then, 15 years ago, data science wasn't even really called data science. I mean, I would go off as far to say that it was mostly, it's more like folks that were in insurance or finance were already kind of like doing this type of predictive modeling. It wasn't didn't have the sexy name data science attached to it that now all these other companies have popularized since social media and entertainment companies started to bring kind of poach those folks over to their companies. So I'm curious, like how you kind of made your foray into specifically data science, and then yeah, like where did that kind of start for you?
I ended up doing a master's degree in computer science a little bit later than most people, around age 30. And pretty much in the first 2 weeks of the first semester of that master's degree, I had picked some classes on machine learning, and I immediately understood that this was a technology that would change the world. Like that was incredibly clear. I would say just like somebody using ChatGPT for the first time and going, "Holy smokes, this thing is real and it's spectacular," you know?
Yeah.
And you're quite correct at the time. This was a little bit just a little bit before data science became known as data science, even though it had been practiced for quite a while earlier. And the topic of my research was at the intersection of machine learning and what at the time was called big data engineering. And I created a text processing pipeline using Hadoop and all kinds of libraries and tools of that library of that ecosystem to classify government RFPs to create a personalized pipeline of RFPs for consultancy directors of the consultancy that was sponsoring my master's degree program, and it worked. And then the machine learning challenge was very interesting. The big data part was overwhelming from beginning to end, but we eventually delivered something that actually worked against all odds. We're talking about Hortonworks 1.0, 1.1. It's like at a time where all of these things were crappy chef and puppet scripts to install things that didn't work half the time.
Yeah.
It was pretty an incredibly cool project, but certainly that when you come out of a project like that, you have battle scars, and you understand that basically you can build anything if you put your mind to it, and,
Yeah.
that kind of 0 to 1 designing a platform for data processing that has some kind of real visible business utility ends up being the driving force of you know what's been driving my choices as I've changed from role to role over my career, because that's what I'm deeply passionate about.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, let me kind of just like respond to some of that. So, I mean, you built this first kind of big, data pipeline using Hadoop. And I mean, my understanding of it is basically what data lakes do for us automatically now, but like you had to kind of do all the parallelizing kind of and figuring out all that logic
Very
beforehand.
different.
And then you stitch together all of these different data primitives from like, the Apache days where like all these different like projects were kind of like things that you had to go and piece by piece kind of put it together. I made date myself. I started my data career in like Snowflake already existed, and data lakes were already there. So I've never had to build that out end to end. And I'm curious. I mean, you did that. That's truly 0 to 1, like back then. And as you're doing it in the modern data stack now, like I like to kind of make that contrast really
Oh,
really
it's
clear
incredible.
for folks. Like what's the difference between doing the 0 to 1 build the first time that you did it using all of those systems back then versus kind of like what 0 to 1 looks like with the modern data stack today?
I think that the most visible difference is what is the pace of development and the quality of the developer experience in order to and also the emergence of a body of well understood, well known best practices to guide us. Yeah. So the tooling is better, our understanding of what we should do and what the end state looks like is better. In the early Hadoop days that I started that project, I did not know what the end looked like. I did not understand the tools well. Every time you went into a different tool, the API and the thinking behind it was radically different. I was porting, so I designed a Python data science machine learning algorithm to do the classification. Fine, porting that over into the Hadoop world where I needed to actually get the data to it. So that required learning how to use the file system because the file system of Hadoop was special and different and quite complicated in and of itself. Then you need to do some data cleaning. Well, oh God, what do I do? So you could do it in Java, and just like you said, the algorithms you kind of have to do everything yourself. We decided to use Pig instead, which was a tool that was invented at Yahoo, I believe, to create that kind of abstraction over the raw map reduce code that was very difficult to understand for anything significant, anyways. And so I had to learn that. Then, okay, I have the data. Now I have to apply machine learning. So there's another library for that. It's Mahout. Now I have to jump into Java programming. So now I've gone from Python to Bash to Pig Latin, which was the language of Pig, to Java. And all the while you're kind of just catching up to everything. And you don't even have the luxury at the beginning of knowing what the end looks like. Today, we start with well-established patterns around best practices of data engineering. We know that it's going to end up in a data warehouse. We understand that it should be in some kind of star schema data modeling style. We understand that the best way to do those data transformation is probably dbt. So we stay quite a while in SQL world. Data integration is click, click, click task. We happen to be using Airbyte, but you could just as well be using Fivetran, Matillion, like God knows what, right? Brother Stack, something else, right? And so that's pretty easy as well. We need to do some kind of data quality validation. Well, you can buy a tool like Monte Carlo. You can use open source tools as well to do something similar, maybe with soda.io. I don't know, right? Such as it is, right? That modern data stack, understanding from the start, these are going to be my pieces. This is how they're going to work. I ingest over here. It's going to end up over there. My transformations are DBT over here. All of this is understood right from the beginning, and I am minimizing code as much as possible so that actually in the first 2 or 3 months, we were able to deliver something like 150 models to production. Were they at the level of what a bank would create? Like, no, but we're a startup and getting stuff out the door is really, really important. And that initial, insight about leveraging these tools that work well together allowed us to deliver quite a lot of value in the first even 1 or 2 quarters through adding a bunch of new data sources that were not there before, such as DynamoDB, Salesforce, Stripe data, and a bunch of other things. And the company was able to transition away from a virtualized data virtualization based solution, essentially grabbing all of their analytics, which were already quite sophisticated when I showed up, essentially straight off of the production DB. An analytics copy of it, but the
Yeah.
schema was the operational DB schema, and they're kind of complaining everything's slow. So we kind of delivered quite a lot of value by creating these good star schemas and easy transformations and all of that was doable by one person because I did not work alone. And this is super important when when you're talking about being successful as 0 to 1, is to not work in a dark office somewhere where nobody knows what the heck you're doing.
Yeah.
It's always tempting to do that because you're so focused on doing certain things, but and people don't tend to question what you're doing very much because nobody understands what you're doing anyways. But quite the opposite. I reached out, I listened. What do people want? What are the data sets that people are looking for? Where's the demand in terms of data? What are the issues that we need to overcome? Connecting new data sources was probably number one. Performance was number two. So by bringing in Airbyte and DBT very quickly, we were able to deliver on those things. And I think that this speed and productivity combined with, like I said, reaching out to the rest of the organization meant that in a couple of teams, again, very early on, I got people to buy into what I was pushing, what I was recommending, and most of the DBT transformation work was not done by me. It was actually done by team members who use the tool to create the models that they need. So for example, the risk team that
Hmm.
is our most sophisticated data user, very critical function in a fintech. They migrated all of what they were doing off of the data virtualization solution and into DBT with a lot of materialized tables. And they
Hmm.
did that, I would say 80 or 90% on their own,
Wow.
right? So I set up the tools, I taught them I taught them how to fish and they fished, right? So I do think that technology is a critical, success factor for this kind of work. But, the consulting aspect of, working with the people around you and getting people to buy in and join into the work is the real lever. I would say like the fulcrum is the technology, but the lever is the people, basically. And that's how we were able to do as much as we've done. With me focusing as much as possible on the foundational piece of it, I would say 30-40% of my time. And another 30% or so of my time has been, yes, working on direct use cases. I've written some software to grab data out of certain APIs that we needed, for example, for credit bureau scoring data and things like that were not doable with just click, 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 unfortunately, because we needed to
Yeah.
combine data from our databases to make the right API calls. And so you're not just sucking stuff out, you're actually sucking it out intelligently. So
Yeah.
that intelligence needed to come from some custom code, and that delivery was initially quite interesting since I hadn't coded in like 3 years, but we got there. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's running like a rock every day.
Amazing. I mean, that was such a, I mean, thank you for that. It was so
I'm
many gold
rambling. I'm
nuggets in
sorry.
there.
I'm rambling. I'm sorry.
Oh no, all good. You read my mind and it kind of just answered like three questions at a time. But I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna drill into a couple things because I think some of it deserves more attention. So like I think one thing I want to park on is like, well, yeah, we're talking. I think data teams often think about like velocity, like how much can we get done over time. Like it's not, I think especially now that there's more and more parallels with like running sprint cycles with data teams and doing a kind of do it, even the on the project management side, like we're doing like we're managing data projects very similarly to software engineering products at this point. I mean, you something that you described that was like incredible was, yeah, the way that you have kind of entered this your current team and been able to achieve like 150 plus models in 3 months or something. That's insane. Like I think that's a speed that most people cannot fathom. I think from our own experience, like sometimes we enter into teams that have already tried to do, some sort of DBT model. Maybe they already have a couple hundred models out there, but it's like a, 5+ year old organization and we're having to do a lot of consolidation. But yeah, even from when we're just getting started, I think maybe the initial model, like, I don't know, like 30 to 50 in like in the first couple of months is already kind of, I would say is pretty fast. And the volume that you've been able to put out, clearly you said is because you've taught your team how to fish and they're the ones that are also coming building the
Exactly.
models.
Exactly.
And so obviously it's not just you like being completely
Because
superhuman.
how would I know, right? I
Yeah.
just showed up.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think would be interesting. I think you mentioned the part of that. I'm curious, like if we broke it down, some of those models are just analytics replica of like the production database, and then you're basically doing some refactor, building some schemas to make the querying a bit faster. So maybe a lot of it is kind of just retrofitting what was already there, and then like a bunch of it was new integrations as well. Could you kind of speak to like how much of that was you identifying, okay, this is the core data from the application that I need to go and sprint after, make sure that it's ready for reporting. And then also like to prioritize new data sources, right? Like, could you speak to that a bit more on like what trade-offs you made there and how you prioritized?
I do think that I've spent quite a few years in consulting prior to this role, and while it's easy to heap all kinds of scorn on the PowerPoint jockeys from top tier consultancies, there is a lot of incredible capabilities, incredible skills to learn from the consulting toolkit that you develop by working for a while in these kinds of organizations. And one of these, some of these that have been instrumental to my everyday work in a startup is the ability to communicate with business people in a way that is on their terms that they can understand and that can resonate with them, to enter a dialogue with them basically where I'm not there to impose a tech agenda. I'm here to understand what are the priorities of the organization with respects to data and analytics and make them happen in the most efficient possible way. So that was basically my first month, was just talking to people, listening to what pain points they had, and I kept hearing like, why can't I access Salesforce data? Why can't I access Salesforce data? Why can't I access DynamoDB data? I've been waiting for this for like 3 months. I've been waiting for this for like 4 months. So these were things that really came out. The second thing that I find to be really like a superpower is the capability to integrate all of these different things and prioritize them effectively, and have the pattern recognition to do that with confidence. And to know what the big stuff is, to know what the small stuff is, and to not worry too much about the small stuff. I don't suffer from decision paralysis very much. And not only that, but also is, again, going back to communication, but it's one thing to communicate with business people, but also it's to build allies within the engineering organization as well, right? Which means that every decision that I've made an important point of then going back to my CTO, going back to the head of platform, and sharing my plans with them and saying, does this resonate? Does this make sense? How is this aligned with what we're doing? How do we integrate our roadmap so that we help each other and not just kind of fight over things? And so that kind of 1, 2, 3, where one, you're kind of understanding the problems that exist, you have a strategy to fix it that converts into a real plan with essentially a roadmap that you could then put into a Jira board and just burn down basically. But along the way, going back to the technical side leadership and going, this is what I plan to do. This is how I plan to do it. Do you have any concerns? What is got like and so because when you're coming in, like I've gotten like 6 new tools integrated into the organization in about a year. That's a lot.
Mhm.
That's not normal. But I've done this process like a million times. And so for me, it is absolutely normal that when I'm considering to buy a tool, I have a process in terms of what is the tool for? Why do we need it? Who is it going to, what pain points is it going to solve? What are the alternatives? How much is it going to cost? Why is it the right thing? Writing it all these things down, aligning with people in the process so that by the time I'm formally asking for it, it's kind of a done deal, you know? So
Yeah.
all of these things together kind of work and reinforce each other so that the time that I actually spend on delivery is, well, much less than it otherwise would be, but I know it's the right stuff.
Yeah.
And the people around me agree this is the right stuff. And so what time I do spend is spent on high leverage solutions and high leverage solutions in as much as possible a high productivity way because we're choosing our tools smartly, you know?
Yeah.
At least that's been the strategy so far.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, I want to kind of look into that. So obviously, tooling has changed a lot over the past even 5 years. Like, I just still remember when DBT first was like kind of incubated within an agency, right? It wasn't even really like a product company, and they spun off, and now they're kind of set the standard for what like that whole data modeling semantic layer kind of part of the pipeline looks like. Yeah, I guess obviously you've probably gone through very many waves of different tooling. So now for right now, you may feel like the package of the six tools that you feel like best serves like the modern data stack needs today, and maybe you've had a few reps in implementing that, and like it helps that you're a systems thinker. You're able to really not just like buy one tool off the shelf at a time and not be able to abstract and talk about its impact. And so I think it's helpful that you're able to kind of do some of that consolidation and like you're a very well informed shopper compared to most folks, right?
Oh yeah.
Um, yeah, I'm sure vendors, yeah, you are afraid to talk to you. But I think that's a really important skill for data folks who are kind of data leaders that are kind of assumed to be like the trusted expert on a bunch of things that they've probably never seen. But like it's kind of like, yeah, I've not seen it as exactly that before because it came up the past 2 years, but I've probably worked with something similar and I could figure it out. Like,
Me
how do
too.
you update kind of how do you stay on top of things and like what are the core pieces that you think are important to the stack that you're willing to and like when are you willing to entertain like the next innovation within each of those kind of components?
That's a really good question. I think that for me, I learn a lot by doing. I don't have the luxury of spending 20 hours a week reading all kinds of stuff left and right and
Yeah.
watching videos left and right. I wish I did, but I don't. I do try to stay on top of three, four, five of the best data blogs that I can find. For example, Modern Data 101 or
Mm,
Seattle Data Guy. I mean the quote unquote the big ones, the best ones. So
yeah.
I try to keep on top of what these guys publish. I do try to buy and read the latest, most important technical books on topics. So like I try to be strategic about it. Again, I don't intend to spend 20 hours of my week every single week reading up on stuff. So it has to be a couple of hours, no more.
Yeah.
I learn a lot by doing, and I think that I've been in the business for long enough at this point where I feel like I have a pretty good nose for what what matters. If you take LLMs, for example, I was fashionably late to the party because for the first several years, it was just a bullshit thing that consultants use to sell a lot of consulting services. That's fine for consultants. And I was in a consultancy and we sold all kinds of, advisory for companies to kind of figure these things out while the consultants were figuring it out themselves. And that was fine, I even built some internal projects in a team that leveraged LLMs to kind of try to generate data pipelines automatically.
Mm,
It kind of worked, which was kind of
really? Hmm,
interesting. Yeah, yeah,
okay.
it was quite interesting. But kind of works and works are two different things. And
Yeah.
taking that for an example, well, my nose was this is tantalizing, but not there. Time invested now will be wasted. So I read about it, but I did not go all in at all.
Yeah.
And now it's evolved to a place where it's part of my everyday workflow.
Yeah.
Uh, I code with it. It's an extraordinary tool to help me make the most of my experience and knowledge to deliver on things that I otherwise could never hope to do. A really interesting example was helping a PM. So she wants to explore some data, scratch here, scratch there, and it turns out the data is in the form of, at least part of the data is in the form of a SQL Server 2019 backup.
Okay.
I've literally never used SQL Server in my life. I do not know TSQL,
Mm,
but I was able to cobble together, extract the data, create a viewer on it, and then extract only the data of interest that my coworker needed. And the whole time, I do not know TSQL. I don't know stored procedures very well. I just don't come from that part of the data engineering world. And I was able to deliver it in a few hours, which was just like absolutely nuts. I mean, I have no
yeah,
idea what I just delivered, but like, I have no idea how exactly I delivered what I delivered, but between what the LLMs were giving me and what, the error messages that I saw and wiggle a little bit over here, wiggle a little bit over there, use a little bit of intelligence and experience, and, you get the capability of extracting VINs out of this, ridiculously retarded database.
yeah,
And it works. And I just, wow. Wow. I mean,
yeah,
5, 10 years ago, this would have been a 1 week project, or we
yeah,
had to hire a consultant because I don't know SQL Server. Nobody else knows SQL Server. We're not a Microsoft shop at all.
yeah,
You know? I've literally never used Microsoft in after my first internship in university, like just never. I've been in the Linux world like the whole time. Like that's the tradition that I grew up in, so to speak, as a
yeah,
professional. And so this kind of thing is really transformative, really interesting. And as I'm getting to understand the technology better and better, there's all these kinds of interesting things that come out of it that I'm now open to and think about as I include how to think about what the next step is. Another good example are data contracts. I've been interested in them for a while, but now it's starting to become a little bit more interesting, a little bit more real. And we might start dipping our toes in that direction towards the end of this year, next year, to integrate that into our data platform. So to me, learning is really all about a kind of inverted pyramid where I try to be pretty on top of the biggest trends, then have a semi-informed perspective where my nose tells me this kind of thing might have potential, and gradually know more and more about the things that I feel are closer and closer to what I really care about until it gets above the bar where I want to really get hands-on with it and use it. But I'm really not interested in playing things for playing things sake. I'm
yeah,
just not in my 20s anymore, so that's just not something that I do. So by the time I'm hands-on with something, it's because there's a value there's something valuable to the business that's at the other end of the rainbow and is worth my effort to actually do. At which point I'll learn what I'll bridge the gap. And that's what I've done with DBT. I had no hands-on experience with DBT before actually using it with this company. I think that in the 5, 6 months that I've been using it, I went from raw beginner to maybe a high intermediate, and that's been good enough to deliver on what I need to deliver. And but prior to selecting it, I had gone deep enough in terms of experience with teams that I led using it to deliver things to clients, reading about it, reading technical blogs about it, to the point where I felt like the risk was basically zero, right? So it's really about spending as little time as possible to get just enough of an idea to know what I really want to get a little bit deeper on. I get
yeah,
a little bit deeper on, and it's really whittling down that constantly growing pipeline of new tools, of new technologies, of new approaches, of new patterns to a set of things that I feel comfortable using, which I will. I mean, obviously, the subset that I actually choose for a particular company. I mean, the amount of tools that I've been exposed to is fairly high. I mean, I've worked on all of the major cloud platforms. I've built things on premise. I've built things in the cloud. I've built things with open source. I've built things with enterprise tools. And so, at the end, you're really circling a subset of what you know and saying, this is the right subset for this organization. And consulting, for me has been a fantastic way to get this accelerated exposure to a lot of different organizations, a lot of different data contexts, it's always the same thing in terms of,
Mhm.
well, every company sucks at governance, every company sucks with single sources of truth, every every organization sucks with their data models, everybody like the problems are always the same. And what we want out of it is always the same. We want beautiful dashboards. We want data models that are super fast. We want data pipelines that are simple and powerful. We want everything to cost very little, performance to be very high. Like we know what we want. We just don't know how to get there. And the other thing is everybody has the same problems, but experiences those problems from their own context, which is always different. Every single organization I've ever seen, they all have the same problems. They all want to go to the same place, but they're always starting from a different context. And therefore, for the data solution architect, if that's a thing, and then maybe it is, maybe it isn't, that's the problem to solve, you know, is when you're a solution architect, is given this particular context, how do we get to a next step that makes sense?
Yeah.
Right? That will have some combination of delivery of value, timeline, necessary investments, technical difficulty to solve, and you're trying to minimize and maximize across all of these different things for that particular organization. And I think in the context of the average startup at Series A to Series B, the modern data stack, the so-called modern data stack, is a really, really good answer. For example,
Sure. Yeah. I mean, once again, I think really good insight into, yeah, like how do you stay on top of kind of like the trends in the data space, but like curate your own subset of like what's helpful for you. In general, like the universal problems across the data stack. And obviously there's like a little bit of context dependency on like what tool selection you end up going with. But clearly your consulting experience was able to kind of help you to pattern match and get try to
mhm,
develop that
exactly.
taste for what subset of tools is best for each, or is better applied to each context. If we could go a little longer, I'd love to just like kind of wrap it up and ask a couple questions. And going back towards what we were saying, I think particularly because you are like really solo team, data team in a Series A, post Series A startup. I think that's an interesting trend to me because I've been noticing the past few years, we've have all these distinct data roles: the data engineer, the analytics engineer, data scientists, and maybe a couple others. They've all been quite distinct, but I think that as you kind of gave in your example, specialization being like the TSQL person for that particular type of SQL within that particular ecosystem, like a specialist in that in a particular sub niche like that may not actually be that differentiable anymore, because now you can have with the enablement of LLMs, like everybody's able to stretch more and able to go and get good enough that they can pretty much like meet the needs of their organization. So from my point of view is I'm seeing a consolidation of these roles, and I think more and more data teams are getting leaner. My last in-house role, pretty bloated data team. We ended up trimming down, and it's part of the reason why I started my company is because I wanted to be able to be like that small, nimble data team, three or fewer people, and be able to go and just be that fractional data team for many different organizations. And so I think like the thesis is kind of similar to what you're actually playing out in your workplace. And so my question is, what do you think is like the threshold where for you you're going to be like, all right, that's the cap. This is when I'm starting to go and I need to grow out the team. Like, what does that look like? Like for you to scale. Obviously you've scaled your time, you're focusing on a lot of high leverage stuff, but where do you hit your ceiling and you feel like you need to hire more, and like what does kind of fanning out from there look like?
Great question. I think that let me refer to my notes because that was a really interesting question. So first is that the scaling out from one to more needs to happen when you have certain indicators that light up on your dashboard. And one of them is that the you have become popular. You
Mhm.
are having meetings with multiple teams at the beginning of at the end of each quarter who want to understand where your capacity is going in the next quarter because they want to make sure that their priorities come through and they don't have to wait. That would be an example. That there is a growing backlog of use cases in the data and analytics space that the company has identified and which has support at the higher levels of the org, meaning that the head of sales, the head of marketing, the head of risk, CTO, the COO, these guys are starting to see and demand and ask for specific use cases. We need to create a sales funnel and create a bunch of analytics on top so that
Hmm.
our churn rate is better understood and that we track it and then we can actually take measures to reduce it somehow. We want to reduce fraud. We've done what we could so far, but now we feel like we need to add advanced analytics because here are a couple of cases that we're not catching right now that have cost us $9,000 last month and is on track to cost us double that this month. Oh, we need to do something about it. So
Hmm.
you're going from vague stuff of we should use LLMs to specific use cases that have upper management eyes and attention, right? And now you're one person going like, well, I would like to do the thing, but I cannot. So when those kinds of things happen, that's probably starting to get to because when you are one person, you have a roadmap and you're able to show to the organization, well, I can do a lot of things, but needs are scaling beyond what my ability to deliver is. And so if you want me to deliver on these things, then it's going to stretch out over the next 9 months. And if we're two people, then it might stretch out until 6 months. And if we go to a three-person team, then we might be able to get this down to 3 or 4 months. And then it becomes a financial decision, but that has clear business imperatives to drive the decision. So that's very, very, very critical. The other elements is that how much time are you spending on foundation work versus value delivery and use cases? That ratio is very important. How much time are you spending on just keeping the lights on and operating things?
Yeah.
When those ratios start to get out of whack, for example, when then you need to spend a lot of time on foundational capabilities. Well, if you're spending a lot of time on foundational capabilities, you can't deliver anything at all for the business. The business typically doesn't like that.
Yeah.
So these are some of the indicators that I would look for to help drive the conversation around when is it time to go from 1 to 2 or 2 to 3 or more. Secondly, there's also a question of well where these people sit. It's easy to just say, oh, data team, data team, data team, but that creates the incentive for the organization to have a centralized team and all the issues that come with it, meaning that business teams want to just swing projects over to the data team and then complain loudly when things take a long time.
Yeah.
That is not a good model. What
Mm.
you want instead is a centralized team that focuses on the data platform and the foundational data, and you have embedded data engineers in teams working on specific business oriented data products.
Yeah.
And
That
so
makes sense.
if a team wants use cases, you hire a data engineer that's going to work on your use cases. And then if
Yeah.
you tell me where my stuff doesn't necessarily need a full-time person, well, fine. That person can quote unquote sit with the data team, but is going to work 50% on your use case in your team and 50% on some other team. And if you can't quite find another team to have work for the other 50%, then it's going to be a tough conversation. Sorry. And if you find, then you find. I mean, again, you want to avoid sharing and you really want to find ways to assign people 100%. It's just much better to manage. But, again, it's always easy to find work. And so if a person is in a particular team and there's actually only 50% of their time needed on the first set of use cases, well, one, I can guarantee you that that will change when
Yeah.
when teams realize that their data requests actually get done, it's incredible the speed at which they will find 5 more things to do. That's
Yeah.
just the fact of working with data. But, fine, work 50% and the other 50% send them back into the data team and work on foundational stuff that benefits everyone,
Yeah.
like better data models, working on speed improvements, reliability improvements, data quality improvements. Like there's always a million things to do.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, super good insights. Really appreciate your time, Matthew. I'm going to just kind of wrap up with a quick lightning round where we just ask a couple of
Yeah,
quick
let's
short
go.
response questions. Yeah. I mean, I gave a few just to get us going, but maybe I'll have more as we keep going. So let's just start with some easy ones. So let's start with underrated data tool that you love.
DuckDB.
DuckDB. Okay. And most overhyped term, I would say in data right now.
In data. In AI, I can answer you. That's super easy. It's agentic, whatever. It's bullshit.
Okay,
It's all
sure.
bullshit.
Yeah.
But data,
Yeah.
I think in data, I don't know. I don't know. I don't think there's a lot of bullshit going on in data
Mm.
right now. I think we're all hard at work on things that matter, and the tools that are on top of the heap right now are the right ones. And I also think that the emerging things are things like data governance, data quality, and
Yeah.
data contracts and things like that. Those are not overhyped. They're not hyped enough.
Yeah. We should have another call and talk about data contract. I'm curious about that. I would say if I were to answer that question, reverse ETL would probably be the most overhyped
Oh
thing.
my God, that's
Yeah.
a good one. I
Yeah.
do agree, but it's a thing.
Yes.
Unfortunately, it is a thing.
Yeah.
Like sales and marketing, they just want their toys. And
Yeah.
because they generate money, the business will always accommodate them, always, forever.
Yeah.
So it is what it is. But it's a good choice.
Yeah. Okay. If you weren't working in data, what would you be doing?
I think I would probably be some kind of solution or enterprise architect.
Okay.
That would probably be, and if not, maybe an economist.
Oh, wow.
Why not?
Okay. Yeah. And then I know you talked about things that you shared a couple blogs, you said books that you would read, but if you were to just pick one book that you think every data leader should, read now, or maybe we'll be more specific, any data leader leading, like a post series A, like data team, like what should they be reading?
They should read the Rewired book by McKinsey.
Oh, okay.
It is
Yeah, no,
not
it's
the
good.
popular choice,
Yeah.
and I could already hear the critics, but that book is genuinely good. There's like an incredible amount of expertise that went into it. I'll just put it this way: the names of the authors on the book are not the actual people who wrote it.
Yeah. I mean, that's any book that a consulting firm puts out.
But there's an incredible amount of expertise in that book, and it speaks to the value orientation for how organization can be successful at taking advantage of data and AI. And it's not just for big organizations. I think there's an incredible amount of insights in there in the approach that I use every day in my work in a startup, and it's like a superpower. So
Oh,
so the recipe is actually in a book. It's in that book.
yeah. Got it. Okay, I got one more question. So let's say, yeah, you encounter a problem that you've never solved in data. It's like something urgent, like you get that dreaded Slack message or like code red message. What's the first thing that you do before you start tackling the problem?
The first thing is to understand, is this even a problem? Don't panic. Don't panic. Take a breath and speak with the people involved first, and everything else after that will come forward. My experience says that more often than not, there's a simpler solution
Mhm.
that can often include do nothing.
Okay. Yeah. No. I clearly a seasoned expert. You recognize the could be a false alarm. Don't panic. The sky is
You know,
not
don't
falling yet.
assume don't assume that the world is on fire. Don't assume it's not on fire. Assume
Yeah.
nothing, right? Like
Mm.
see what's going on, speak to the people. The human presence counts for more than anything, because even if the problem is genuine and even if it's your fault, don't worry, I fucked up already and it's only been a year. People are incredibly forgiving when you are transparent and focused on their needs in the midst of that problem.
Yeah, that's great.
And if you work on people that want to blame you and be not nice, then you just learn something and maybe, right?
Yeah. Well, they're just looking for a scapegoat at that point, and unfortunately, you were the one. Yeah.
Happened to us all. So
Yeah. Happens to the
uh,
best of us.
that's correct.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's I think time's up for us. I think I want thank you so much for the hour that you gave us. Yeah, really just pick your brain. I really enjoyed this discussion. Like I'll be going back and thinking through, and I'll read the book that you recommended and all that. So yeah, thank you so much, Matthew. And yeah, I guess I'd love to stay in touch. And yeah, well, I guess I'll see you around if you're at another event in New York. Just let me
Real
know.
pleasure. Thank you very much.
Cool. All right.